Why integrate? There's basically, in any organization, you have applications that span a bunch of different profiles or departments, really. You have your sales stuff, like your Zoho CRM. You might have some support applications for help desk management, some marketing apps, some accounting apps, maybe some custom apps in Creator, and maybe some apps that just do some random stuff to you that are proprietary or personal to your organization. But basically, most of the time, the apps or the data that lives across each one of these different applications in your organization are kind of like in their own little silos. And so what's really cool, besides this graphic, is that all that data can be tied together with Creator itself. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be bringing in an API integration. So it's basically, we're finding a way to bring third-party information into Creator or sending information from Creator to some third-party application. So before I start that, go over a couple quick Creator concepts that are super important that we're going to be building on today. So the first thing is the concept of lists. So I like to make grilled cheese sandwiches, and so my grilled cheese sandwiches consist of 4 key ingredients. I got bread, I got cheese, a little bit of butter, and some sauce from Taco Bell, because it's the best stuff in the world. And basically, I can make something called a list. So I've got a variable here called Tejas' shopping list, and it's a single variable that has one name, and I define it as a list. And inside that list, I can add multiple pieces of information. And the reason for this is pretty important because I can reference this list whenever I want to and say, let me get all the items that are in the shopping list and bring them back together, but it's all stored in a single variable. I don't have to have them organized or say, Tejas' shopping list 1, Tejas' shopping list 2, and keep all the way going through. I have it all kind of added in together. So the first step is defining a list, and that's basically the line number 1 on the screen that says Tejas' shopping list equals a list. This way, the system knows that this variable is a list variable rather than a normal, number, string, or any other kind of data type. The add is basically a function that operates on top of a list data type. And so you can add things to a list, you can remove things to a list. It's pretty simple. And now, adding things and removing things to a list is, the basics of a list. But more importantly, when you have a list of items, you need to get things out of that list. And so the very last line on here that kind of got small, sorry, in the screenshot, I'll zoom in for you, is line number 8, where I have info of my shopping list, and then I get item number 3. When you have a variable, it starts at 0. Why it starts at 0? Computers start counting things at 0. And so 0, 1, 2, 3, 3 is actually the 4th item in the list. So the next thing outside of a list is what's called a map. Map is not to be confused with Google Maps or Bing Maps or Apple Maps or any kind of map like that. A map is basically a collection of information similar to a list in the sense that it holds a bunch of pieces of information, but a map is far better because in a list, it's not ordered. It's sequential based on the items you're adding to it, but it gets very hard to organize because if I wanted to get the bread item out of the list, I have to pick that bread item out in the order of the list it is in. Versus on a map, I can say the make equals something, the model equals something, the year equals something, and the miles equals something. And these somethings basically means a key value pair, where basically a make is like a field name, if you want to put in kind of Creator terms, and the item on the right-hand side is like a field value. Similar to a list, I define the variable Tejas' card details as a map, and then instead of adding things, I'm putting things. Now, add and put can kind of get confusing. It's just you can't add things to a map, you put things in a map. Because adding is sequential, so you're constantly adding 1 to the list number, versus putting, we don't care about what order you put it in, because we want to get information out of it. We actually go based on this identifier, which is the very first thing, make, model, year, and miles. And if I go info on Tejas' car details and say, get me the model of his car, it's going to come back and say G37 sedan. So it'll say the model here on the left-hand side, which is what it's looking up, and then it'll give me the value on the right-hand side. And the coolest thing about maps is that they can hold different data types. So they can hold strings, they can hold numbers, they can hold decimals, they can hold whatever you want in there. It's all just mashed up into one big little thing. Another way I guess to look at it is you can consider a list to be kind of like a map without the very first column. So instead of make, model, year, and miles, imagine it's 0, 1, 2, 3. Instead of saying, get me something based on name, you're getting me something based on number. So they're kind of similar, but maps are just a little bit better because they hold more information and they're easier to identify. So you're able to order and identify them by the key value rather than a number. It's just easier to deal with. Any API is basically the concept of just sending information from one place to another or getting information from another place into your current application. It's just the way that two computers or two machines that hold information talk to each other. When you're sending and receiving information between two machines, it has to be formatted in a perfect way, otherwise the machine won't be able to understand it, then they'll spill milk on the table or they'll do whatever things that machines do. So sending information, getting information, and how they communicate, it's an API. It's kind of like the language that two computers talk to each other, but they have to make sure they're on the same page. So when you're talking about sending information and receiving information between two different services, there's three different functions we're going to primarily use inside Creator. So there's a get URL, a post URL, and an encode URL. So get URL sounds pretty simple. You're getting information from somewhere. Generally, that's kind of how it works. Post URL means we're posting information somewhere, and we're sending it out. And then the very last one is encode URL. And let's say you pop into Google, and you're doing a search. You'll see here at the very top, we got a URL that kind of has Zoho Creator in there, and it kind of says Q equals Zoho plus Creator. So I kind of assume that they're just making the space a plus just to kind of put it all together, because URLs can't have spaces. But what it does is it basically encodes it so any special characters you're sending out, like a space, a hyphen, a forward slash, things that are not normal in a URL, it'll make it into a format that it can actually go into a URL. So to give you a kind of weirder example, I guess, equals 10 parentheses, whatever that means. So here you can see I've got a hot mess of stuff inside here, right? Nobody can read this, but machines can read this. All you see is that little 10 in there, and I think %3d equals sign, and then 28 and 29 are open parentheses, close parentheses. So it's encoding it into a format that, whether it's a browser or another machine, it can read. Basically, they have what's called an API that we all know about already, and this is their documentation for the API. And at the very top, we can see that it has a GET request, and it says GET API. And inside that, it's showing information about what information it's actually receiving whenever you make that request. So there's three key pieces of information here. Yes, if the answer was forced or not, and then an image that pretty much is an image of a yes GIF or a no GIF, more or less. And then they have, optional parameter down here that says if you want to force it to be yes or no or maybe. So normally when you access this URL, it's going to be either a yes or a no, but if you wanted to force it, you possibly could force it, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And coming back here, if we look at how this data is structured in here, we see an open bracket, so it kind of looks like a map, because basically there's a value key on the left-hand side and a value on the right-hand side. And so we're going to kind of use that concept of how you send and receive information. Generally, there's where you want to send it, and then the value you want to go into that place, essentially. So that's why maps are super important out here. This is two ways that most computers or most APIs are kind of communicating with each other. You got something called XML on the left-hand side and JSON on the right-hand side. And basically, the reason XML kind of isn't that great anymore is you can see how many more characters it takes to write an XML code versus to write something in JSON instead. And both are just pretty much unified formats. They store information in a pretty similar way, but instead, you just have it a lot easier to read over here and a lot less characters. And a lot less characters mean a lot less stress for the computers that are sending and receiving that information. So that's why most people start moving to JSON. Some people have the option to have both, and then some people just have XML only. It just depends. Once you get this information in either XML or JSON format, you got to do something with it, because you make the API request to yes, no, or any service, which we'll do in a second here, and you receive this information back. If I want to pick out a key piece of information, I have to go and parse this massive list of information in here, right? So if I want to get only the names of each person, James Kirk, Jean-Luc Picard, and Wesley Crusher, weird name, then I need to find a way to only get their names. I don't care about everything else. I don't care about their age or anything like that. I just want that one piece of information. And so in order to pick pieces of information out, I have to use a couple other functions, and those are called getJSON, JSON list, if you're working with JSON data types. And if you're working with XML data types, they're kind of similar, just different names, because we didn't want to make it too easy for you. We got execute XPath, which sounds a lot pretty scary, but it's not really. And then two XML lists. So the list ones are pretty self-explanatory. You get a string of data from any service, and like in the previous screenshot, you have a list of employees here. And you see list number 1, list number 2, list number 3, right? They're in some order. It's not a map, so there's no value to it, employee IDs or anything like that. It's just a listing of all of them. How they're sorted is irrelevant. So sometimes you got to iterate through the employees and get every single one's information out of it individually. So that's when you use the list format. For us, in our example, we're going to keep it pretty simple. And then the other two are the get JSON and the execute XPath. Both of them basically pick out individual pieces of information. If I want to get the age of James Kirk, I would basically say get JSON of the employees and then find out the James Kirk person and then dig out that 40 number, which we'll be going through hands-on exercise all in a second here. But it's just a way to fetch information. So these are the 4 main functions in Creator we're going to be using for the API example, and then the previous 3 were get URL, post URL, and encode URL. So we got something called an API request format. And so similar to the way that Google search URL kind of looked is how computers talk to each other, how you're able to access information. And so you have something called the base URL, which is the website you're trying to talk to. And then you have an endpoint. And an endpoint is kind of like a directory system, if you will. And it'll go into the website and find a certain area where it has the whole mechanism to communicate with others. Usually this is siphoned off with either api.companyname.com or companyname.com/API. Generally, most people will use that common concept. Some people will make it more complicated for you, but for the most part, it's always kind of similar to this. And then, just like the yes/no example had, you have something called parameters. So when you're requesting information from a service, generally you might not want everything that it's throwing at you. You want to filter it down. So parameters will let you add different criterias or different specifications to it. You can populate information in a creator form based on a URL, where you can pre-fill a field in a value based on a specific URL that goes into it. Similarly, that all happens based on URL parameters. And so technically this whole thing is just a web page you could really go to, but it's an ugly web page with not a lot of formatting and no prettiness going on to it. So we'll see how it all looks in a browser in a little bit here. But these parameters let you basically filter down that data to see exactly the type of stuff you want to see. So in this case, I had to create a filter that says no filter, kind of ironic, and then a language that says English, and then this equals looks scary, right? So I can daisy chain these filters on top of each other. So for example, if I'm looking into maybe a Zoho CRM account and I want to say, give me all the leads whose last name is Doe and has a status of active, I can add multiple parameters to that. So this way it's not giving me a list of every lead in the system and then requiring me to filter it down. It lets the other person filter it down, let them do the hard work, and then just give me what I need. And then the very last thing is an API key. So API keys are important because that lets the service that you're trying to access identify who you are. So instead of, normally you would type in a username and password on a website, and then you'd be able to access your personal information on that site. But you don't want to type your username and password out in plain text like this. So what companies do is they create API keys, and there's a couple different authentication methods that different products will use or different services will use. But API keys are probably the most prevalent out there. Some are called auth tokens, some are called API keys, some are just called keys. But in this case, it's basically just a character match that they give you that is semi-indecipherable. And in their system, they know that if you give them this key of information here, they're going to know it's me accessing that information. Now we're going to go into this Jiffy thing. So the very first step, go to this web page, and you get taken to this page that has a whole bunch of information. So most API documentation has a lot to go through. And the hardest part about integrating with 2 applications is that no 2 probably API documentations are really similar. Everybody will have it formatted differently. Zoho formats their stuff differently. These guys format it in one way. Somebody else will format it in a different way. And by format, I just mean they'll have different terminology for things. They'll have different organization, different links, different setup processes. And so navigating this page and help documentation is the single hardest thing probably about API stuff. But since I'm here and since you guys are smart, we're going to be able to do this pretty quickly on our own. So the first thing we have to do is find out this API key stuff, right? Because we have to basically authenticate ourselves to Jiffy and say who it is that's requesting that information. And so usually what I end up doing is I'll Command F and just find the word key somewhere and find out what their authentication is. And now I've got to that part of the web page, so I'm going to scroll down and zoom in so you guys can see. And basically it says something along the lines of, to use your API, you have to get an API key by creating an application, and then you need an account to create an app, and then that's why you all created an account earlier, so you could make this app and follow along today. And after that part, I usually just stop reading. The rest is probably not that important to me. Generally, there's a couple other caveats in there. The 2 biggest things to look out for when you're making API requests to a third-party service is something called a usage limit and something called a rate limit. So both of them sound pretty similar, but both have kind of different meanings. If I'm using a free service, I probably can only request information from it so many times per day. And so different companies will have different methods for doing this. Even Zoho itself has different API limits, basically because we don't want a single customer going overboard and requesting information 1,000,000 times a day, or 2,000,000 times a day, or 5,000,000 times a day. So imagine how many people are probably pinging Jiffy over here to look up GIFs all the time, right? You have Jiffy keyboard, you have Jiffy apps, you have Jiffy everything out there, and they're all polling Jiffy for information. So how does Jiffy make money? Well, they start selling API access essentially. And they'll say that, look, if you want to use the free account, you're more than welcome to. You can maybe search Jiffy 1,000 times a day, and then you're stopped. And if you want to search more than 1,000 times a day, then it's going to cost you maybe a penny a call, or maybe $10 to get 10,000, or some pricing structure they may have. So generally, that's how a lot of bigger companies will make some of their information, is by charging people to request more information from them. Usage limit is based on volume. So the rate limit is also important, because how fast or how often you request information is also a limiting factor for the person receiving that request. If someone goes and tries to send off an API request or request information from a service, maybe one time every second, it might be manageable. But if someone is sending maybe 1,000 requests per second, it might not be so manageable anymore, because they're going to keep getting bombarded with requests that they're not able to answer quickly enough. It's kind of like how DDoS attacks pretty much work. If a website goes down, you're getting too many requests from too many places, we can't serve all those requests at the same time or fast enough, and then things just start going, crashing and haywire. So also sometimes you'll be able to pay more to increase that limit, but for the most part, they're pretty generous, and unless you're writing a bad script, you probably won't run into a rate limit issue, just because in creator levels, you're probably not accessing that much information. So usage limit and rate limit. But in this case, since we're just doing a simple example, we're not really worried about it, and I'm not looking for that piece of information, but it is something important to look for whenever you're investigating APIs. So back to the workshop piece, we're going to click on this little blue link. That means it's a hyperlink, and we're going to create an application. So here it's going to say create a new app. And the reason it creates a new app is basically just a connection to the Jiffy service. So I can give it an app name, it doesn't really matter, and we give it a description just because we can describe it, just so we can manage the different ways that we are building Jiffy integrations. So I type in an app name and a little description. One thing is, once you create one, you'll get this little gray box, and inside it has an API key. I'll zoom in on this so you can see it. And like I mentioned before, it's a very long hash of characters that basically tells Jiffy who I am. Rule number one about API keys, auth tokens, anything like that, don't ever show it to anybody. In this account, I don't care because there's nothing in there. But generally speaking, it's not something you want to expose publicly, because that API key is almost identical to a username and password. If I have your Zoho API key, I can go and ping your creator application, ping your CRM application, ping any Zoho service at that matter, depending on what services you have, and start requesting information out. So it's super important to keep this hidden and secure and safe. Now we got this API key. Let's find out what the next steps are. So I'm going to take this API key and pop back over into Karen's Cooking class. And I'm going to go ahead and create a function. So we click on the workflow icon or on the sidebar, and then we click on this functions tab up here. And we're going to create a new function. So we click the blue button over here and click new function, and we get this little pop-up. So here we can give it a name. We can put it in a namespace if we want to, and then we pick the return type. So here, the name is just going to be a simple, let's call it Jiffy demo. Namespace, it's a filing cabinet. Yeah, it's just kind of a hierarchy to organize these things, because once you start getting better and better at scripting, you're going to have hundreds of functions out here, maybe thousands, who knows, if you're really good. And having them all just alphabetically listed is not very helpful. So usually I'll make a namespace for different actions, things like custom actions, things that are happening on a certain form, things that have certain purposes. Giving something a really descriptive name, and preferably a namespace, is just a really good practice. And then you pick your return type. In this case, I'm just going to make it void, because I'm not sending anything into the application. And don't really care to send anything out. It's all just a test playground in this function itself. So I click done and create the Jiffy demo. So now that I got the function piece set up, I'm going to come back into the Jiffy documentation. I'll copy this API key. And let's just come over here and say API key, put it in some quotes, and define that variable just for storage purposes, so we can close that page out. So everybody should you can call it whatever you want to. I called it API key, but you can just call it API or key or whatever. Popping back over to that main link, developers.jiffy.com. We got the API key piece down, but now what we really need is to figure out how to start using it, right? We now got the authentication part figured out. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a search. So there's the very first option is the search method is what it's called, really. Or click on that search thing, or you can Command F and search on the page. It'll tell you the information similar to what I had on that slide before. It's got a host, or basically the base URL, which is api.jiffy.com. And then it has the path, which is version1/gifs/search. And after this, it's got some descriptions that tell me what this method does. And then it has some parameters down here for us as well. So all I really need to do is take this host, put it before the path, and then we'll figure out the rest after that. And so I'll say host equals that part. And I will add an HTTP in front of it. And then I'll say path equals the path. So /v1/gif/search. And put that bad boy in quotes as well. So everybody should have 3 lines of code here. One that says API key, or one that holds the API key, one that holds a host, and one that holds a path. Is it necessary to split them up into 3 different lines? Not really, but just to make it a little bit simpler to read and easier to digest for everybody, we can do this. And I shouldn't have a colon there. All right, so now we got the base part and the host down. Now we need to figure out this parameter nonsense. So they got a couple of different options for parameters. And the first thing is called API key. So what's really important here is what they have in bold. So they have API_key. And that is basically the essentially field name, if you want to look at it in creator terms, that we're going to fill out with our API key. So here it says your API key on the right-hand side. So what I really need to do is make sure that I use this specific naming structure. I can't capitalize anything. I can't put a space, no hyphens. It's a copy and paste situation because it has to be the exact field of information I'm fetching from in order to be able to authenticate myself or even do any of these things properly. So I'm going to take API_key parameters. We're good. And we'll start off with the initial question mark because that initiates the process of adding parameters. And we'll say API_key equals. And then we'll use our handy tool that we learned earlier about concatenation and say add in the API key value there. And then we're going to keep doing stuff, so I'll add another plus at the end. So this should be the next line of the script. Added API key and then added the variable that we defined. So now that we've authenticated ourselves, the next important thing about finding a GIF is basically the string or the search item. So I want to search the GIFs, and if we're searching for GIFs, there's probably nothing better than cat GIFs. So we're going to say Q equals cat back in our script and put another pair of quotes and say Q equals. Generally, what you would have is probably some variable or some field value. More than likely, you would have some dynamic thing that's being searched for. But just in this example, to keep it very simple and show how outside information is being brought into Creator itself, we're just going to hard code the word cat. So I'll just put cat in separate quotes so you guys can know. Right? So here it's going to basically say Q equals the word cat. I could have put it all together, but later I'll replace the word cat with some field value. You have to put an ampersand in here that I forgot to do earlier. So the ampersand basically says we have one parameter that we're adding, and then we're adding another parameter, and then another parameter. This is the way it splits them all up into different sections, so we know which parameter is which. If we just had one very long thing, it wouldn't really know if the Q right here belonged to the API key or was initiating the next parameter that needed to be sent over. So ampersands are required. So now that we got our API key and we got our string, those are the only 2 things that are really required here. We're just going to use that. So let's say our API response equals, so we're going to type in get URL, and then I got to type in the URL that we actually want to send over. But in this case, I don't want to go and do all the math inside this box parameter for the function get URL. So I'll just make another line and say our API URL, the host, plus the path, plus the parameters. And I'll take this API URL and put it there. So you got about 6 lines of code here so far. 3 of them could kind of get scrunched into, actually all first 4 lines. Actually, it could really just be a 2-line API call if you really wanted it to be, but I just made it more spread out. So these are the 2 lines you probably should create. API URL equals those 3 parts of the API request together. And then we're actually going to go and do that GET request. And then the very last thing is you got to figure out what the response really is. And for that, we'll just say info API response. So we're going to execute this script. So one thing that they have here is a limit. So I can say the maximum number of items to return. The default is 25. I don't want 25 cat pictures. Nobody wants 25 cat pictures. Copy the word limit, and I'm going to add that to my parameters here. So I'm going to say plus limit equals 1. Ampersand. All right, so we're going to add limit equals 1. You should always save your changes. In case you didn't know, when you're typing in this stuff inside deluge box like this, if you press Command S or Control S on your browser or on your Windows computer, it'll save the script. So if I press Command S, it'll say saving at the very top up here. And it's a very easy way to just save a script constantly. I save scripts like a million times per thing I'm writing. It's just very good practice. And then if you want to execute a script, I can click this execute button, but instead of moving my mouse all the way down here, I can actually press Command and E or Control E on a Windows computer and execute the script. So now I got a little bit more information here and just a lot of stuff that's still more than one. There's like MP4s in, all right, it's just still a mess. Too much stuff that I want to deal with right here. So I'm going to click close again. Actually, this thing goes on and on and on. Too much. So I got to figure out how to decipher this bad boy. So generally what I do is I copy and paste this thing. I copy and paste it, JSON formatter. It's got a pretty little blue box. Paste in whatever it came in, say process, and it's going to format all that information into a lot more readable way to manage it, right? So looking inside the meta folder, nothing really useful in there. Looking inside the pagination folder, nothing really useful in there. Looking inside the data folder, ironically enough, has the actual data that I'm looking for. Now, looking a little bit more deeper into this, and it does require a little bit of manual reading. I mean, there's no real automated way to do this. But there's different things of information in here that I could use. So there's a preview, there's an original, there's a preview GIF, a fixed height small, and a whole bunch of different options in here, right? I mean, I'm not even sure what it is I really want. And this is another hard part of, any API request, because you got to find and actually dig out that piece of information. So let's say chances are I want the original GIF, and I probably want it in GIF format. So I'll take this URL right here, and that's really the important thing that I want. It just kind of makes sense. The GIF would be the actual GIF URL under the original folder. It might be, it might not be, it doesn't really matter, but in this case, that's what we're actually going to take. So just to make sure I picked an actual something, I'm going to open up a new tab, put that URL in there, and see if that actually is a cat GIF. Yep, that's definitely a cat GIF. All right, cool, so it works. The search request worked, and then it returned some information, and then there's one bit of information inside that massive blob of data that I need to pick out. And so how do I pick out that information? So in order to pick out that piece of information, I have to use that get JSON concept that I used a little bit earlier. So the get JSON basically gets each one of these individual folders. So what I'm going to do in here is say, let's say the data folder, I'll call it data folder, equals the API response dot get JSON, and then I'll put data. And I'll info that data folder because I don't really know what I'm going to get or if this is even right. So we're saying that let's take that API response we get, and then we're going to execute a function, the getJSON function, on that variable that has all that data in there, and just give me everything in that data folder. Let's ignore the pagination folder and ignore the meta folder. So we should just add these two small little lines. Now, some people were taking pictures, but if you're taking pictures, like the script will be shared with you. It's in the slides, so don't worry too much about that. And we're going to info this data folder. So I'm going to save and execute. And so now I can see that if I take everything in here, pretty much, and put it in there, and have a process. So no longer do I have the pagination folder up here. So now if I scroll or click on the collapse thing, it's only giving me the information in that data folder itself, which is great. I'm making progress. It's kind of like when you double click on a folder on your browser or on your computer, on your Mac or Windows, you're going folder by folder, clicking to get the file that you want. Essentially, we're just doing the same thing here. Into this original folder, and once I'm inside that original folder, I want to get the folder called URL so I can get that data inside that's associated with it. Two more lines of code are going to be required here. So now we got basically 3 get JSONs. First we got the data folder, then we're getting the original folder on the data folder, and then we're getting the URL folder on the original folder, right? So it's just folder, folder, folder. I got to change my info. Click save, execute this bad boy. Now that I got an error, it said it was at line 11, so let's figure out what I went wrong at this. So I'll figure out what's at the original folder and save this and execute it. This is our live debugging example here. So now it gave me null. Again, not very good. So what happened with this original folder? Where did it go? It's actually inside of an images folder. One more folder. If nothing else got spilled around. All right, so now we got a lot less information to work with. So let's dig one more in and uncomment out this URL folder and see if I can get that URL out. So everyone's script should kind of look like this now. Data, images, original, URL, and make sure that these are all cascading based on the variable from before. Your naming structure can be different, but they still have to, you're digging into the folder that was found earlier. Click execute, and now we got our pretty little URL here. And this is the only URL. Put it in the browser, I get the same image. And so now what I can do is we can, now that we have a function that catches information from Jiffy, fetches exactly what it is that we're looking for, and stores it in now this variable called URL folder, which I could probably rename to cat GIF essentially or whatever. We've dug through everything, we got the GIF URL, and now that we actually have this data of the URL itself stored in this one variable, we can basically use that variable and send it anywhere else we want to. So it doesn't really matter. We can update a field based on Dylan's fetching status, we can have a script, run a loop, do whatever, but now we've got outside information coming directly inside of Creator without all in like what, less than a dozen lines of code, really? And if you need this, again, this script right here will get copied and pasted into that resources application, so everyone will have access to it. With Creator, instead of having to do this full-blown API integration with a third-party service, if you're using other Zoho services, then we have integration tasks, which are kind of just like functions, essentially, that let you fetch and update information from other Zoho services directly inside of Creator. And then, if you're just lazy and sometimes just quicker, you can use third-party integration tools like Zapier, if this then that, what's as, it does it. And basically, these different tools will do this whole 2-application integration system for you, so you don't have to write all this code. The trouble with using things like this, just a heads up, a lot of people probably use them, is that when you use an integration over here, you don't actually have that like process of what's actually happening inside of Creator itself. So a lot of times people will create an integration in Zapier and then make some change in Creator. Zap is going to stop working. So you have to make sure you manage all the connections you have in outside services from an integration platform versus what you're building in Creator itself. And soon with Zoho Flow, you don't even need any of these losers. You can just build it all yourself in Zoho Flow. So it'll be a lot easier for you. 3 little things. These are just helpful tools. You'll have the slides for, but they really help you with debugging situations and testing stuff when you're making API calls.